Maggie's knees hit the frozen ground. The snow soaked through her dress, but she couldn't feel it anymore. Couldn't feel anything except the weight of Lily's small body against her back and Thomas's hand slipping from her grip. "Mama, I can't walk no more." She'd carried them 3 miles. 3 miles through the blizzard. 3 miles to beg a stranger for mercy. The iron gate of the Hartwell Ranch rose before her like a judgment. If you want to know what happens to Maggie and her children, subscribe to our channel and stay until the end. Drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. The snow had stopped falling, but the wind hadn't stopped cutting. Maggie Holloway stood at the iron gate, her children pressed against her legs like they were trying to disappear into her skirt. Lily, 8 years old, clutched her father's old sketchbook against her chest. She hadn't spoken in 3 days. Thomas, 5, looked up at his mother with eyes too old for his face. "Mama, is this where the nice man lives?" Maggie didn't know if the man was nice. She only knew he was rich, and she was desperate. "Stay here, babies." "No." Lily's voice cracked. "Don't leave us." Maggie knelt in the snow, ignoring how the cold bit through her worn stockings. She took Lily's face in her cracked, bleeding hands. "I ain't leaving you, not ever. I'm just gonna talk to the man who owns this place. You watch your brother." Thomas tugged her sleeve. "What if he says no?" Maggie had no answer. She'd rehearsed this moment for 3 sleepless nights, practicing the words she'd have to say. Each syllable tasted like broken glass. But glass wouldn't kill her children. The cold would. She pushed open the gate. The hinges screamed like something dying. The main house sat 200 yards up the path. Timber and stone smoke rising from the chimney. Lamplight glowed in the windows. Warm light. Safe light. Maggie walked toward it, each step heavier than the last. She'd sold everything. The furniture Daniel had built with his own hands. Her mother's china. The quilt her grandmother had stitched for her wedding day. All of it gone. Traded for food that ran out a week ago. The only thing she had left was Daniel's wedding ring cold against her palm. And her children. She'd give up one to save the other. The front door opened before she reached the porch. A man stepped out. Tall. Broad shoulders. Silver threading through dark hair. A scar ran along his jaw, white against weathered skin. His eyes were pale blue, the color of winter sky, and they took in everything at once. Maggie stopped. The man descended the porch steps slowly, like he was approaching a wounded animal. "Ma'am?" His voice was low, rough at the edges, not unkind. Maggie opened her mouth, but the words stuck in her throat. 3 days of walking. 3 days of carrying her children through the snow. 3 days of praying to a God she wasn't sure was listening. She swallowed. "I'm looking for Mr. Hartwell." "You found him." Elijah Hartwell stood before her, arms crossed against the cold, studying her with those winter sky eyes. "What can I do for you, ma'am?" Maggie's legs trembled. She locked her knees to keep from falling. "I need work." The words came out thin, barely more than breath. "Any work. I can cook, clean, mend clothes. I can read and write. I used to teach school before—" She stopped. Before Daniel died. Before the railroad company refused to pay for his burial. Before the landlord threw them out. "Before," she finished. Hartwell's expression didn't change. "You walked here." "Yes, sir. 3 miles from Redstone Creek." "In this weather?" "Yes, sir." His gaze moved past her toward the gate. His jaw tightened. "Those your young'uns?" Maggie turned. Lily and Thomas stood at the gate, 2 small shadows against the white landscape. Thomas had his arm around his sister. Lily was shaking. "Yes, sir." Maggie's voice broke. "They're mine." Hartwell was silent for a long moment. Maggie could hear her own heartbeat, loud and frantic. "They eaten today." The question hit her like a fist. She tried to answer, but the truth was too heavy for words. "Ma'am?" Hartwell's voice was gentler now. "Have those children eaten today?" Maggie shook her head. The tears came before she could stop them. "Not since yesterday. I had some bread left. I gave it to them. But it wasn't enough, and She pressed her fist to her mouth. "I'm sorry. I didn't come here to cry on your porch." "What did you come here for?" Maggie reached into her pocket and pulled out Daniel's wedding ring. Gold worn thin from years on his finger. The last piece of him she had left. She held it out to Hartwell, her hand trembling. "Take my children." The words hung in the frozen air. "They're strong," Maggie continued, her voice shattering. "Lily can sew better than most grown women. Thomas is smart. He learns fast. They won't complain. They'll work hard. Just—" Her voice caught. "Just let them live. Please. That's all I'm asking. Let them live." Hartwell looked at the ring in her palm. Then he looked at her face. Really looked. The way decent men did before the world taught them cruelty. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "put that ring away." Maggie's heart stopped. "Please," she whispered. "I'm begging you." "I said put it away." He stepped closer, his voice firm but not harsh. "I ain't taking your ring, and I ain't taking your children." The rejection hit her like a physical blow. Her knees gave out. Hartwell caught her before she hit the ground. "Easy," he said, holding her up. "Easy now. Please." Maggie gripped his coat with frozen fingers. "I'll do anything. Anything at all. Just don't let them die. They're all I have. They're all I have left." "Ma'am." Hartwell's hands were steady on her shoulders. "Listen to me. I said I ain't taking your children. I didn't say I wouldn't help." Maggie looked up at him, not understanding. "I'll take you too," Hartwell said. "All three of you. Tonight." Maggie couldn't move, couldn't breathe. "Sir, Josefa," Hartwell called over his shoulder. "We got guests?" A woman appeared in the doorway. 60 years old, maybe older, with dark skin and kind eyes. She took one look at Maggie and crossed herself. "Dios mío. Elijah, she's frozen through." "I know." Hartwell stepped back, releasing Maggie's shoulders. "Get blankets, warm up some broth, and tell the boys to make up the East Wing." "The East Wing." Josefa's eyebrows rose. "That's been closed since. I know what it's been." Hartwell's voice was hard. "Open it." Josefa nodded and disappeared inside. Hartwell turned back to Maggie. "You're young'uns. They can walk." I think so." "Go get 'em. Bring 'em inside. We'll talk after you've eaten." Maggie shook her head. "I must work. Earn our keep. I won't accept—" "Ma'am." Hartwell held up a hand. "I've got a ranch that needs running and books that ain't been balanced in 2 years. You said you can read and write. You said you used to teach." "Yes, but—" "Then you'll work. This ain't charity. It's an arrangement." He paused. "A fair one." Maggie stared at him. This man she'd never met offering her everything she'd prayed for. "Why?" The question came out before she could stop it. "Why would you do this?" Hartwell's jaw tightened. For a moment something passed across his face, something old and heavy and painful. "Because I know what it's like," he said quietly, "to lose everyone you love." He turned and walked back into the house, leaving Maggie standing in the snow with a ring in her palm and a future she couldn't quite believe in. Thomas ran toward her the moment she reached the gate. "Mama! What happened? What did he say?" Maggie knelt and pulled both children into her arms. She held them so tight she could feel their hearts beating against her chest. "We're staying," she whispered. "We're staying." Lily pulled back her eyes wide. "Staying here. Here. Tonight. Maybe—" Maggie swallowed. "Maybe longer." Thomas's face lit up. "He's a nice man, Mama. I told you he was nice." "Hush, baby. We don't know that yet." But even as she said it, Maggie felt something shift in her chest. Something she hadn't felt in 18 months. Hope. The inside of the Hartwell house was warm. So warm that Maggie's frozen skin burned as the blood returned to her fingers. Josefa wrapped all three of them in thick wool blankets and sat them by the fire in the main parlor. Thomas fell asleep within minutes, his head on Maggie's lap. Lily stayed awake, watching everything with those quiet, observant eyes. "Here." Josefa handed Maggie a bowl of broth. "Drink, slowly. Your stomach won't handle much at first." Maggie's hands shook as she lifted the bowl. The first sip hit her tongue and she nearly cried. It was the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted. "Thank you," she managed. Josefa nodded. "The little ones. Lily, can you drink a little?" Lily took the second bowl without speaking. She drank half, then handed the rest to Maggie. "You finish it, Mama. You gave us all the bread." The words broke something in Maggie's chest. She pulled Lily close and kissed her hair. "We're gonna be okay now, baby. I promise." Lily didn't answer. She'd stopped believing in promises a long time ago. An hour later, Hartwell returned. He'd changed into dry clothes, a worn flannel shirt, heavy work pants, boots that had seen 1,000 miles. He pulled a chair across from Maggie and sat elbows on his knees. "Children asleep." Maggie nodded. Josefa had taken them upstairs to the east wing, to beds with real mattresses and quilts thick enough to disappear into. "Good." Hartwell studied her. "Now, tell me what happened to you." Maggie didn't want to. The story was ugly, and she was tired of carrying it. But he'd earned the truth. "My husband was a railroad man," she began. "Daniel Holloway. He worked the mountain line, laying track through the Rockies. Dangerous work, but it paid well." "I know that work." Hartwell's voice was flat. "Lost 2 friends to it." Maggie nodded. 8 months ago there was an accident. Tunnel collapse. 12 men dead. Daniel was one of them. She paused, steadying herself. The company said it wasn't their fault. Said Daniel was careless. They refused to pay death benefits. Refused to even help with the burial. "Bastards." The word was quiet but sharp. "I had to sell his tools to pay for the grave." Maggie's voice trembled. "Then I had to sell the furniture to pay the rent. Then the landlord raised the rent anyway and I couldn't—" She stopped. Drew a breath. "We've been moving from place to place ever since. I took work where I could find it, washing clothes, cleaning houses. But it's winter now, and nobody's hiring, and the boarding house threw us out 3 days ago because I couldn't pay." She looked up at Hartwell, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "I walked 3 miles in the snow because someone in town said you were a fair man. That you treat your workers right." She swallowed. "I didn't know what else to do." Hartwell was silent for a long moment. "Who told you I was fair?" "A woman at the general store. Mrs. Perkins, I think." Something flickered in Hartwell's expression. "Martha Perkins. Her husband used to work for me." "Used to. He passed last spring. I kept sending her half his wages till she told me to stop." Hartwell shrugged. "She's too proud to take charity." Maggie almost laughed. "Then I reckon she and I have something in common." The corner of Hartwell's mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, "I'm going to make you an offer. You don't have to accept it tonight. Sleep on it. Think it over. Decide in the morning." Maggie nodded, her heart pounding. "I need someone to manage the household accounts. Books are a mess, and Josefa's got enough to do without adding numbers to her list. I also need someone who can teach. Got 4 ranch hands who can't read or write, and it's holding them back." He leaned forward. "You work for me, you get room and board for you and your children. You get a wage, fair wage, same as any hand, and you stay as long as you want." Maggie's throat tightened. That's very generous." "It ain't generous. It's practical." Hartwell's voice was gruff. "I need help. You need work. Simple as that." But it wasn't simple, and they both knew it. "Mr. Hartwell," Maggie said carefully, "won't people talk a widow living in your house with her children? Let 'em talk. I'm serious. A man in your position, Mrs. Holloway." Hartwell's eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. "I buried my wife and daughter 6 years ago. I've spent every day since then working this ranch like a man trying to outrun his own shadow. I don't care what people say about me. I stopped caring a long time ago." The raw honesty of it silenced her. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "About your wife and daughter." Hartwell's jaw tightened. It was a fever. Came through in the summer of '72. Took 'em both in 3 days. He looked away toward the fire. "My daughter's name was Clara. She was 4 years old. She had her mother's eyes." Maggie said nothing. Some grief was too heavy for words. "After they died," Hartwell continued, "I closed up the east wing. Couldn't stand to look at it. Josefa wanted to clean it out, give the clothes to families in need, but I wouldn't let her." He turned back to Maggie. "Tonight, when I saw your children at that gate, I thought—" He stopped, swallowed. "I thought maybe it was time to open those rooms again. Let someone live in them." Maggie's vision blurred. "Mr. Hartwell?" "Eli," he said. "Call me Eli. We're going to be living under the same roof. Might as well use first names." "Eli." The name felt strange on her tongue. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just rest. We'll figure out the details tomorrow." He stood the chair scraping against the wooden floor. "Josefa will show you to your room. There's clean clothes in the wardrobe, might be a bit big, but they'll do till we can get you something that fits." He walked toward the door, then paused. "Mrs. Holloway." "Maggie," she said. "If we're using first names." The ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Maggie, your children are safe now. I want you to believe that." "I'm trying." "Try harder." He tipped his head. "Good night, ma'am." And then he was gone. Footsteps fading down the hall, leaving Maggie alone by the fire, with a full stomach and an uncertain future. The East Wing was beautiful. 3 bedrooms each with its own fireplace. Quilts on the beds thick and soft. A wardrobe full of women's clothes. Sarah Hartwell's clothes, Maggie realized carefully preserved for 6 long years. Lily and Thomas were already asleep in the largest bedroom, curled together like puppies. Josefa had tucked them in with the kind of gentle efficiency that spoke of long practice. "He's a good man," Josefa said quietly, standing beside Maggie in the doorway. "Eli. He doesn't show it, but he is." "Why did he do this?" Maggie asked. "He doesn't know me." "He knows pain." Josefa's voice was soft. "He knows what it looks like on a mother's face. That's enough." She touched Maggie's arm. "Sleep now. Tomorrow, you start your new life." But Maggie couldn't sleep. She lay in the unfamiliar bed wrapped in unfamiliar blankets, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling. Her body was exhausted, but her mind wouldn't stop spinning. Daniel had been dead for 8 months. For 8 months she'd fought to keep her children alive, fought to find work, fought to keep a roof over their heads. And for 8 months she'd failed. Until tonight. Tonight, a stranger had opened his home to her, had offered her work, shelter, dignity, had looked at her children and seen something worth saving. She thought about his face when he'd talked about Clara, the way his voice had cracked on her name, the raw, unhealed wound of a father who'd lost everything. He wasn't doing this for Maggie, he was doing it for himself. He was trying to fill the rooms that grief had emptied, and somehow knowing that made it easier. This wasn't charity. It was 2 broken people trying to help each other survive. Maggie closed her eyes. For the first time in 18 months, she wasn't afraid of the morning. Dawn came cold and gray. Maggie woke to the sound of Thomas's laughter. She sat up, heart pounding, and stumbled to the window. Below in the yard, Thomas was chasing a dog, a big shaggy thing, with a wagging tail and a lolling tongue. And standing on the porch, watching them with his arms crossed, was Eli Hartwell. He looked up as if sensing her gaze. Their eyes met through the frosted glass. He tipped his hat. Maggie's chest tightened. She didn't know what this was, this arrangement, this unexpected mercy, this second chance she hadn't dared to hope for. But she was going to find out. She turned from the window and went to wake Lily. Breakfast was eggs, bacon, and fresh bread. More food than Maggie had seen in a month. Thomas ate like he'd never seen a meal before. Lily ate slowly, carefully, as if afraid someone would take the plate away. Eli sat at the head of the table, drinking coffee, watching them with an expression Maggie couldn't read. "After breakfast," he said, "I'll show you the books. You can start going through them whenever you're ready." "I'm ready now," Maggie said. Eli raised an eyebrow. "You just got here. And I don't intend to waste a moment." She met his eyes. "You're giving my children a chance to live, Mr. Eli. The least I can do is earn it." Something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe. "All right then." He stood. "Josefa, you mind watching the young'uns for a bit?" "Of course." Josefa smiled at Lily and Thomas. "Come, niños, I'll show you the chickens." Thomas jumped up immediately. Lily hesitated, looking at her mother. "Go on, baby," Maggie said gently. "I'll be right here." Lily stood slowly. At the door she paused and looked back. "Mama." "Yes." "Are we really staying?" Maggie glanced at Eli. He gave a small nod. "Yes, baby." Maggie's voice was steady. "We're really staying." The study was small, lined with books, and absolutely chaotic. Papers covered every surface. Ledgers lay open and abandoned. Receipts spilled out of drawers like escaping prisoners. Maggie stared at the mess, then turned to Eli. "You weren't joking about the books being a disaster." "I don't joke about money." Eli leaned against the doorframe. "I know how to run cattle. I don't know how to run numbers." "Your wife used to do this." The question slipped out before Maggie could stop it. She immediately regretted it, but Eli just nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "Sarah was educated. Boston family. She handled all the accounts. And after she passed, I let it go." He shrugged. "Didn't seem to matter anymore." Maggie understood. When Daniel died, she'd stopped caring about a lot of things too. It was only her children that had kept her moving forward. "I'll need a few days to sort through everything," she said. "Maybe a week." "Take as long as you need." She turned to face him fully. "Eli, I want to be clear about something." "Go ahead." "I'm grateful for what you're doing. More grateful than I can say. But I won't take more than I've earned. Whatever wage you pay me, I intend to deserve it." Eli studied her for a long moment. "You know what I see when I look at you, Maggie." She shook her head. "I see a woman who walked 3 miles through a blizzard to save her children. I see a woman who offered up her wedding ring, the last thing she had of her dead husband, because she loved her babies more than her own heart." He stepped closer. "I see a woman who's been fighting alone for too long." Maggie's throat tightened. "You've already earned more than I could ever pay you," Eli said quietly. "The question is whether you'll let yourself accept it." He left without waiting for an answer. Maggie stood alone in the chaos of the study, clutching the edge of the desk, trying not to cry. By midday, she'd made progress. The receipts were sorted into piles. The ledgers were stacked in chronological order. She'd found 3 separate accounts that hadn't been reconciled in over 2 years. She also found something else. A small wooden box tucked behind a stack of papers. Inside was a child's drawing, a house, a horse, a stick figure family of 3, and a lock of dark hair tied with a ribbon. Clara's things. Maggie closed the box carefully and put it back exactly where she'd found it. That evening, she joined Eli on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the snow gold and pink. The air was cold but still, and somewhere in the barn, a horse whinnied softly. "Find anything interesting in those papers?" Eli asked. "A few things." Maggie wrapped her shawl tighter. "You've been overcharged by at least 2 suppliers, and there's a debt owed to you almost $100 that was never collected." Eli's eyebrows rose. "Who owes me $100? "Cornelius Webb." The name landed like a stone in still water. Eli's expression went cold. Judge Webb. You know him. Everyone knows him. Eli's voice was flat. He owns half the town, sits on the bank board, runs the court. He paused. And he ain't the kind of man who forgets to pay a debt. Maggie frowned. What do you mean? I mean, if Webb owes me money and hasn't paid, there's a reason. Eli turned to face her. And it probably ain't a good one. Something cold slithered down Maggie's spine. Should I not have? No, you did right telling me. Eli's jaw tightened. I'll look into it tomorrow. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the last light fade from the sky. Eli. Yeah. Thank you. Maggie's voice was barely a whisper. For everything. He looked at her, then really looked the way he had at the gate. Like he was seeing past her face to something deeper. Don't thank me yet, he said quietly. You don't know what you've walked into. Before she could ask what he meant, he turned and went inside. Maggie stayed on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one, wondering what secrets this ranch was hiding, and whether she was strong enough to face them. That night, Lily had a nightmare. Maggie woke to screaming and ran to her daughter's room. Lily was sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face, gasping for breath. Mama, the roof was falling. Daddy was trapped. I couldn't. Shh. Maggie gathered Lily into her arms, rocking her gently. It was just a dream, baby. Just a dream. I saw him, Mama. I saw Daddy. He was trying to get out, but the rocks kept falling and I couldn't help him. I know, baby. I know. A knock at the door. Eli stood in the hallway, a lamp in one hand and a cup of warm milk in the other. His hair was disheveled, his shirt untucked. He looked like he'd run. Thought she might need this, he said quietly. Maggie took the cup, her eyes meeting his over Lily's head. Thank you. Eli nodded. He didn't leave. Instead, he sat down in the chair by the door, set the lamp on the floor, and waited. Maggie sang softly a lullaby her mother had taught her, something about stars and rivers and coming home. Lily's breathing slowed. Her grip loosened. She slept. When Maggie finally looked up, Eli was still there. Clara used to have nightmares, he said quietly. After Sarah got sick, she'd wake up screaming, convinced her mama was gone. He stared at his hands. I used to sit with her all night. Didn't matter how tired I was. I'd sit there until she fell back asleep. You were a good father. The words seemed to startle him. He looked up, eyes bright. I tried to be. Maggie laid Lily gently back on the pillow and stood. She walked to where Eli sat, and after a moment's hesitation touched his shoulder. You still are, she said. That didn't die with Clara. He looked up at her, and for a moment the mask fell away. She saw the grief, the loneliness, the desperate aching need to matter to someone again. Get some rest, Eli, she said gently. Tomorrow's a new day. She walked back to Lily's bed and sat on the edge keeping watch. Behind her she heard Eli rise, heard his footsteps move toward the door. Maggie. She turned. I'm glad you came to my gate, he said. And then he was gone, leaving her with a sleeping child and a heart that suddenly felt too full for her chest. Morning brought sunshine and purpose. Thomas woke with energy to spare, racing through the house, until Josefa caught him and put him to work collecting eggs. Lily sat by the window in the study, sketching the view with a pencil Eli had given her. Maggie spent the morning buried in ledgers, making notes, tracing transactions, building a picture of the ranch's finances. By noon, she had answers. Eli. He looked up from the saddle he was mending. Yeah. I found something. Something you need to see. She spread the documents on the table between them. Ledger entries, receipts, a contract with Judge Webb's signature at the bottom. 5 years ago, you co-signed a loan for someone named Tom Hartley. Eli's face went still. My foreman. He passed last spring. Webb holds the note, and according to Clause 17, he can call it in anytime he wants. How much? $2,000. Maggie met his eyes. Due in full within 30 days of the call. Eli sat back, the color draining from his face. That's half my operating capital. I know. If Webb calls that note in, I'll have to sell the north section to cover it. I know. Eli was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was cold. Webb's been trying to get that land for years. It's right where the railroad's planning to expand. How do you know that? Because Webb's on the railroad board. Eli's hands curled into fists. He's got information nobody else has, and he's been using it to buy up land on the cheap. Maggie understood now. The debt, the threat, the leverage. He's going to call the note, she said quietly. Isn't he? Eli nodded slowly. The question is when. He looked at her, something hard in his eyes. And what he wants in exchange for holding off. The answer came 3 days later. Maggie was in the study reconciling the last of the overdue accounts when she heard hooves on the frozen ground. She moved to the window and saw a black carriage pulling up to the main house, polished and expensive, entirely out of place against the rough landscape of the ranch. A man stepped out. Tall, thin, dressed in a dark coat with silver buttons. His face was sharp, calculating the kind of face that measured everything in terms of profit and loss. Judge Cornelius Webb. Maggie's stomach tightened. She set down her pen and listened. The front door opened. Eli's voice carried through the house, flat and unwelcoming. Webb, didn't expect to see you out here. Elijah. Webb's voice was smooth, polished like oil on water. I thought we might have a conversation. Man to man. About what? About your future. A pause. And hers. Maggie's blood went cold. She moved silently to the study door, pressing herself against the wall, where she could hear without being seen. You got something to say about Mrs. Holloway? Eli said. You can say it to my face. I have nothing against the woman personally. Webb's tone was almost pleasant. But you must understand how it looks. A wealthy rancher unmarried taking in a desperate widow and her children. People talk, Elijah. They assume things. Let them assume. It's not that simple. Webb's voice hardened slightly. You're a pillar of this community. Your reputation affects all of us. The bank, the church, the businesses that depend on stability. My reputation is my own concern. Is it? A soft laugh. I hold a note, Elijah. A rather substantial one. Callable at my discretion. Silence. Heavy and dangerous. You threatening me, Webb? I'm offering you friendly advice. The smooth tone returned. Resolve your domestic irregularity. Send the woman and her children away. Find a proper wife through proper channels. And I'll forget that note exists. Maggie's hands curled into fists. Her nails bit into her palms. And if I don't, then I call the note. 30 days. Full payment. Webb paused. You'd have to sell the north section to cover it. And we both know what that land is worth once the railroad comes through. Another silence. Longer this time. When Eli spoke, his voice was quiet. Deadly quiet. Get off my property. Elijah. I said get off my property. The words were sharp as a blade. And if you ever speak about Mrs. Holloway or her children again, I'll make you regret it. You're making a mistake. Maybe. But it's my mistake to make. Footsteps. The front door opening. The carriage creaking as Webb climbed back in. Maggie pressed her back against the wall, heart pounding. She heard the carriage pull away, heard Eli's boots on the wooden floor, heard him stop just outside the study door. You can come out now, he said. She stepped into the hallway, face burning. I wasn't trying to. I know. Eli's expression was unreadable. You heard everything. Yes. He nodded slowly. Then you know what he wants. He wants me gone. He wants my land. Eli's jaw tightened. You're just the excuse he's using to get it. Maggie shook her head. If I leave, he'll back off. You won't lose the ranch. And you'll what? Eli stepped closer. Go back to starving. Watch your children freeze to death in some alley in Redstone Creek. I'd figure something out. Like you figured something out before you showed up at my gate. The words hit hard. Maggie flinched. Eli's expression softened. I'm sorry. That was cruel. It was honest. Maggie forced herself to meet his eyes. You're right. I had nothing. I still have nothing. All I'm bringing you is trouble. You're bringing me life. The words came out rough, almost angry. For 6 years I've been dead inside, walking around working the ranch but not really living. Then you showed up with those children, and something in me woke up. He reached out, stopping just short of touching her face. I'm not sending you away, Maggie. Not for Webb. Not for anyone. Her throat tightened. Eli. The question is, what we do next. He dropped his hand. Webb's gonna call that note. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. We need to be ready. Maggie straightened. Then let me help. I've been through those books. There might be something we can use. Like what? That $100 he owes you. The debt that was never collected. She paused. What if there's more? What if Webb's been manipulating the accounts for years? Eli studied her. You think you can prove that? I think I can try. For the first time since Webb's carriage had appeared, something like hope flickered in Eli's eyes. All right, he said. Let's find out what that bastard's been hiding. The next week passed in a blur of ledgers and late nights. Maggie worked through every document in the study, tracing transactions, cross-referencing dates, building a picture of the ranch's financial history. Eli helped where he could, explaining deals and handshakes that had never been written down. What she found was damning. Judge Webb had been quietly manipulating accounts for years, overcharging on supplies through businesses he secretly owned, calling in debts early when ranchers couldn't pay, then buying their land at a fraction of its value, using his position on the bank board to block loans to anyone who opposed him. He's been stealing from the whole territory, Maggie said, spreading the evidence across the kitchen table. Not just you, everyone. Eli stared at the papers. Can we prove it? Some of it. The rest is circumstantial. She pointed to a stack of receipts. But if we can get testimony from the other ranchers he's cheated, we might have enough to take to the territorial marshal. Most of those ranchers are scared of Webb. They won't talk. They might if they knew they weren't alone. Eli was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. I'll ride out tomorrow. Talk to a few people I trust. And if Webb finds out what you're doing, then he'll know I'm not backing down. Eli met her eyes. Whatever happens, Maggie, we face it together. Agreed. She held out her hand. Agreed. He took it. His palm was rough, calloused from years of work, but his grip was gentle. They held on longer than necessary. Neither of them mentioned it. Sunday came cold and bright. Maggie dressed the children in their best clothes, the ones Josefa had altered to fit. Thomas squirmed as she combed his hair. Lily stood perfectly still, staring at nothing. Do we have to go to church, Mama? Thomas asked. I like it here better. Church is important, baby. We thank God for our blessings. Is Mr. Eli a blessing? Maggie paused, comb in hand. I reckon he is. Eli was waiting by the wagon dressed in a dark suit that looked like it hadn't been worn in years. He helped Maggie up onto the seat, then lifted Thomas and Lily into the back. Ready? He asked. No, Maggie admitted. Me neither. He clicked his tongue, and the horses began to move. But we're going anyway. Timber Creek's white clapboard church sat on the hill like a judgment. Families gathered in the yard, their Sunday best, catching the cold sunlight. Heads turned as the Hartwell wagon approached. Whispers spread like wildfire. Maggie felt them land sharp and invisible. She kept her chin up, her spine straight. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Eli helped her down from the wagon. His hand lingered on her elbow a moment longer than necessary. Stay close, he said quietly. Don't let them see you're afraid. I'm not afraid. Good. The ghost of a smile. Then let's give them something to really talk about. They walked into the church together, the children between them. Eli guided them to a pew near the front, ignoring the stares and mutters that followed. Thomas swung his legs oblivious. Lily pressed against Maggie's side, trembling. "It's all right, baby," Maggie whispered. "I'm right here." The service began. Reverend Oakes was young Ernest, new to the territory. He preached about mercy and forgiveness, about loving thy neighbor as thyself. Maggie wondered how many of the people listening actually believed it. After the final hymn, the congregation spilled into the yard. Maggie tried to keep her head down, tried to slip away unnoticed, but a voice stopped her cold. "Well, well, the rancher's charity case." Mrs. Calhoun stood before her, arms crossed, lips pursed in disapproval. She was the Reverend's mother, a woman who wore her righteousness like armor. "I beg your pardon," Maggie said. "You heard me." Mrs. Calhoun's voice carried across the yard. "A widow with 2 children moving into an unmarried man's home. Do you have no shame?" Maggie's face burned. "I work for Mr. Hartwell. It's a business arrangement." "Is that what they're calling it now?" Mrs. Calhoun laughed high and cruel. "In my day we had a different word for women like you." Lily began to cry. Something inside Maggie snapped. "Mrs. Calhoun," she said, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. "I don't know what you think you know about me, but I'll tell you what I know about myself. I walked 3 miles through a blizzard to save my children's lives. I offered up my wedding ring, my husband's ring, to a stranger because I loved my babies more than my own pride." She stepped forward. Mrs. Calhoun stepped back. "I have worked every day since my husband died to keep my family alive. I have scrubbed floors and washed clothes and gone hungry so my children could eat. And I will not stand here and be judged by a woman who has never known a moment of true desperation in her entire comfortable life." Silence fell over the churchyard. Mrs. Calhoun's face went red, then white. She opened her mouth to respond. "Mama." Lily's small voice cut through the tension. Maggie looked down. Her daughter's face was wet with tears, but her eyes were fierce. "Can we go home now?" Home. Lily had called the ranch home. Maggie took her daughter's hand. "Yes, baby. We can go home." She turned and walked toward the wagon, Lily on one side, Thomas on the other. The crowd parted before her. Eli was waiting. He'd heard everything. "You all right?" he asked quietly. "No." Maggie's voice shook. "But I will be." He helped her into the wagon. As they pulled away, Maggie looked back once. Reverend Oakes stood apart from the crowd watching them leave. His expression was thoughtful. Not everyone in this town had a cold heart, but enough of them did to make life very difficult. The ride home was silent. Thomas fell asleep against Eli's shoulder. Lily stared at her hands, lost in thoughts Maggie couldn't reach. When they pulled up to the ranch, Josefa was waiting on the porch. One look at their faces told her everything. "I'll make tea," she said, and disappeared inside. Eli carried Thomas to bed. Maggie sat with Lily in the parlor, holding her daughter close. "Mama." "Yes, baby." "Why do they hate us?" Maggie had asked herself the same question 1,000 times. She still didn't have a good answer. "They don't hate you, Lily. They're afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Of things they don't understand." Maggie stroked her daughter's hair. "Some people think the world should stay exactly as it is. When something changes, when someone new comes into their lives, it scares them. And scared people can be cruel." Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mr. Eli isn't scared." "No, he isn't." "Is that why he helped us?" Maggie thought about the question. Thought about the man who had opened his home to strangers. The man who had lost everything and still found the courage to begin again. "I think Mr. Eli understands something those people in town don't," she said finally. "I think he understands that we're all just trying to survive, and the only way to do that is to help each other." Lily nodded slowly. "I like Mr. Eli." I know you do, baby. Do you like him, Mama? The question caught Maggie off guard. She felt heat rise to her cheeks. I think I do. Lily smiled, the first real smile Maggie had seen from her in days. Good. I think he likes you too. Before Maggie could respond, Eli appeared in the doorway. Lily, Josepha's got some warm milk for you in the kitchen. Why don't you go get some? Lily looked at her mother, then at Eli. Something passed between them, an understanding Maggie couldn't quite interpret. Okay, Lily said, and slipped out of the room. Eli sat down across from Maggie. The firelight played across his face, softening the hard lines. Thank you, Maggie said, for standing by us today. I should have said something. Should have put that woman in her place. I can fight my own battles. I know you can. Eli leaned forward. That's not the point. The point is you shouldn't have to, not alone. Maggie's throat tightened. I've been alone for a long time. So have I. He held her gaze. Maybe it's time we both stopped. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Eli, A knock at the front door interrupted her. Eli frowned. Who'd be calling at this hour? He rose and went to the door. Maggie followed, staying in the shadows of the hallway. Reverend Oakes stood on the porch, hat in hand. Reverend? Eli's voice was cautious. Something I can help you with. I hope so, Mr. Hartwell. The young Reverend glanced past Eli, spotted Maggie in the hall, and nodded to her. Mrs. Holloway, I owe you an apology. Maggie stepped forward. For what? For what happened today? For not speaking up when Mrs. Calhoun... He stopped, clearly uncomfortable. It was cowardly of me. I should have defended you. You don't owe me anything, Reverend. Yes, I do. Oakes met her eyes. I came to this town to preach the gospel, to teach people about mercy and compassion. And today I watched a member of my congregation attack a woman who's done nothing wrong, and I said nothing. He turned to Eli. Mr. Hartwell, I know there are people in this town who disapprove of your arrangement with Mrs. Holloway, but I want you to know that I'm not one of them. That's a dangerous position to take, Reverend. Perhaps. Oakes straightened. But the right position usually is. He put his hat back on. I'll be preaching about it next Sunday, about how we treat the widows and orphans in our midst, about what the Bible actually says, not what certain people wish it said. That won't make you popular, Eli said. I didn't become a reverend to be popular. Oakes smiled. I became one to do what's right. He tipped his hat to Maggie. Good night, Mrs. Holloway. Mr. Hartwell. And then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness. Eli closed the door and turned to Maggie. His expression was thoughtful. Interesting man. He's brave, Maggie said, standing up to his own congregation like that. Maybe. Eli moved past her toward the parlor. Or maybe he's just young enough to still believe in justice. Don't you believe in justice? Eli paused at the doorway. He was silent for a long moment. I used to, he said finally. Before Sarah and Clara died. Before I learned that life doesn't care about fairness. And now, he turned to face her. In the dim light, his eyes were bright with something she couldn't name. Now I believe in people, he said. Individual people. Josepha, Reverend Oakes. A pause. You. Maggie's heart stuttered. Me? You walked into my life and reminded me that survival isn't enough, that there's still something worth fighting for. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. I'm not sure what this is, Maggie. This thing between us. But I know I don't want to lose it. She should step back, should say something sensible about propriety, about timing, about the dangers of moving too fast. Instead, she reached up and touched his face. Neither do I, she whispered. He leaned into her touch. His eyes closed. For a moment, he looked almost peaceful. Then his eyes opened, and the moment shattered. We should be careful, he said, pulling back slightly. Webb's watching, looking for any excuse to use against us. I know. If we give him ammunition. I know Eli. She dropped her hand. But I'm tired of living in fear. Tired of letting other people's opinions decide how I live my life. So am I. They stood there inches apart, the fire crackling behind them. What do we do? Maggie asked. Eli was silent for a moment. Then he reached out and took her hand. We fight, he said. Together. Maggie squeezed his hand. Together, she agreed. The next morning brought trouble. Maggie was helping Josefa with breakfast when one of the ranch hands burst through the door, face flushed with cold and urgency. Boss, you need to come quick. Eli was on his feet instantly. What is it? Fence line's been cut. North section. At least 30 head of cattle are missing. Eli's face went dark. Show me. He grabbed his coat and hat, then paused at the door. Maggie, stay here with the children. Keep the doors locked. Eli, what's happening? I don't know yet. His jaw tightened. But I've got a pretty good idea who's behind it. He was gone before she could ask more. Maggie spent the morning pacing. Josefa tried to calm her, but it was no use. Something was very wrong. Eli didn't return until late afternoon. When he walked through the door, his face was gray with exhaustion and fury. Well, 32 head, gone. He dropped into a chair, rubbing his face. Fence was cut clean. Professional job. Webb. Can't prove it. But yeah. Eli looked up at her. He's sending a message, showing me what he can do if I don't fall in line. What are you going to do? I'm going to find those cattle. He stood. And I'm going to find proof. How? Webb's got a lot of enemies in this territory. People he's cheated, people he's threatened. Eli's eyes were hard. Maybe it's time they started talking to each other. Maggie thought of the documents she'd found, the pattern of corruption and manipulation. I might be able to help with that, she said. She spent the rest of the day compiling evidence, names, dates, amounts, a clear picture of Webb's criminal enterprise. By evening, she had a list of 12 ranchers who'd been affected, 12 potential witnesses. Eli studied the list, his expression grim. Some of these men lost everything because of Webb. Then they have nothing left to lose. Maggie met his eyes. That makes them dangerous. Dangerous to who? To the man who destroyed them. Eli nodded slowly. I'll ride out tomorrow. Talk to as many as I can. Be careful. Always am. But Maggie knew that wasn't true. Eli Hartwell wasn't careful. He was stubborn and brave and reckless when it came to protecting the people he loved. She just hoped it wouldn't get him killed. That night, Maggie couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind howl outside. Her mind raced with fears and possibilities, with plans and contingencies. A soft knock at her door. She sat up. Who's there? It's me. Eli's voice. Low, uncertain. She pulled on her robe and opened the door. He stood in the hallway, still dressed, a lamp in his hand. What's wrong? Nothing. He paused. Everything. He looked at her, and the mask he usually wore was gone. I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about what happens if I fail. If Webb wins. If I lose the ranch and can't. Eli. I can't lose you, Maggie. The words came out raw, broken. I can't go back to being alone. I can't. She pulled him inside. They sat on the edge of her bed side by side, shoulders touching. The lamp cast flickering shadows on the walls. You're not going to lose me, Maggie said quietly. Whatever happens with Webb, whatever happens with the ranch, I'm not going anywhere. You can't promise that. I can promise to try. She took his hand. That's all any of us can do. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. After Sarah died, I wanted to follow her. I worked this ranch like a man trying to outrun his own shadow. Sunrise to midnight. Anything to stop thinking. I know. Then you walked up to my gate with those children, and something in me woke up. He turned to face her. I remembered what it felt like to want to see the next morning. Maggie's throat tightened. Eli. I love you, Maggie. The words hung in the air between them. I know it's too soon. I know we've only known each other a few weeks, but I've spent 6 years not saying what I feel, and I'm tired of it. He reached up and touched her face, his calloused palm gentle against her cheek. I love you. And I love those children. And whatever happens next, I want you to know that. Maggie's vision blurred with tears. I loved Daniel, she whispered. I loved him with everything I had. And when he died, I thought that part of me died too. She covered his hand with hers. But then I met you. And I started to remember that love isn't finite, that my heart didn't stop when Daniel's did. She met his eyes. I love you too, Eli. He kissed her then, gentle at first, tentative like a question. She answered by pulling him closer. They held each other in the lamplight, two broken people finding something whole. Tomorrow would bring more battles, more danger, more uncertainty. But tonight they had each other. And for now, that was enough. Eli left before dawn. Maggie stood on the porch watching him ride into the gray morning light, her heart caught somewhere between hope and terror. He turned once, tipped his hat, and then the darkness swallowed him whole. She didn't go back inside. She stood there until the cold bit through her shawl, until Josefa came out and pulled her gently toward the warmth of the kitchen. He'll come back, Josefa said. That man has survived worse than Cornelius Webb. Has he? Josefa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, he survived losing everything he loved. After that, nothing else can break him. Maggie wasn't so sure. She'd seen the way Eli looked at her now at the children. He had something to lose again. Something that could shatter him in ways he'd never fully healed from the first time. And that terrified her. The first day passed slowly. Maggie threw herself into work organizing the study, teaching the ranch hands their letters, helping Josefa with the endless tasks of running a household. Thomas followed her everywhere, full of questions she couldn't answer. Lily stayed close to the fire, sketching in her book, quiet and watchful. Mama, when is Mr. Eli coming back? Soon, baby. How soon? I don't know. Thomas frowned. I don't like it when he's gone. The house feels wrong. Maggie pulled him close. I know. I don't like it either. The second day brought visitors. Maggie was in the study when she heard hooves on the frozen ground. She moved to the window, heart pounding, hoping to see Eli's familiar form. Instead, she saw 3 riders she didn't recognize. She met them at the door, blocking the entrance with her body. Can I help you, gentlemen? The lead rider was big, unshaven, with mean eyes and a meaner smile. We're looking for Hartwell. He's not here. That's so. The man leaned forward in his saddle. When's he expected back? I couldn't say. Maggie kept her voice steady. If you'd like to leave a message, I'll see that he gets it. The men exchanged glances. Something passed between them, an unspoken decision. Tell him Judge Webb sends his regards, the lead rider said, and tell him time's running out. They turned and rode away without another word. Maggie's hands were shaking as she closed the door. She pressed her back against it, breathing hard. Senora. Josefa stood at the end of the hall, her face drawn with concern. Lock all the doors, Maggie said, and keep the children inside. That night, Maggie sat by the fire with Eli's rifle across her knees. She'd found it in the study, cleaned and loaded, and she'd spent an hour teaching herself how to use it. Her father had shown her once, years ago. She remembered enough. Thomas and Lily were asleep upstairs. Josefa dozed in the chair across from her, refusing to leave Maggie alone. Every creak of the house made her jump. Every gust of wind sounded like approaching hooves. But no one came, and Eli didn't return. The third day broke cold and clear. Maggie was making breakfast when she heard Thomas shout from the upstairs window. Mama Ryder's coming! Lots of them! She grabbed the rifle and ran to the door. Her heart stopped. A dozen men on horseback were approaching the ranch. At their head, riding tall in the saddle despite 3 days of hard travel, was Eli. and behind him a group of ranchers she didn't recognize. Hard men with weathered faces and determined eyes. Maggie set down the rifle and walked out to meet them. Eli dismounted and crossed to her in 3 long strides. He pulled her into his arms without a word, holding her like he'd been afraid he'd never see her again. "You came back," she whispered. "I told you I would." He released her and turned to the men behind him. "Maggie, these are the ranchers Webb's cheated over the years. They've agreed to testify." One of the men stepped forward. He was older, gray-bearded with a missing finger on his left hand. "Mrs. Holloway." He tipped his hat. "Name's Jacob Mercer. I lost my ranch to Webb 5 years ago. He called in a loan I didn't even know I'd signed. Forged your signature. That's what I always suspected. Never could prove it." Mercer's eyes hardened. "Until Hartwell here showed me the pattern. Webb's been doing this to ranchers all over the territory, and we're done letting him get away with it." Another man spoke up. "I'm Tom Bridges. Webb took my water rights 3 years back, claimed there was a survey error. By the time I could challenge it in court, my cattle had died of thirst." One by one, the men told their stories. Land stolen through legal manipulation. Debts called in at impossible times. Families destroyed by a man who hid his crimes behind a judge's robe. Maggie listened, her heart growing heavier with each account. "What do we do now?" she asked Eli. "We take it to the territorial marshal. All of it." Eli's jaw tightened. "Webb's got power in Redstone Creek, but he doesn't own the whole territory. There are honest men in Denver who'll listen. And if they don't—" Eli met her eyes. "Then we make them listen." The men stayed for a meal and a few hours of rest. Josefa worked miracles with what they had, feeding 12 hungry ranchers without complaint. Thomas was fascinated by the visitors, peppering them with questions about their horses and their guns. Lily watched from a distance, still wary of strangers. Before they left, Jacob Mercer pulled Maggie aside. "Mrs. Holloway, I want you to know something." "Yes." "When Hartwell came to my door, I almost didn't let him in. I've been beaten down so many times, I'd stopped believing anything could change." Mercer paused. "He told me about you, about what you did for your children, about how you walked 3 miles through a blizzard with nothing but faith and desperation." Maggie didn't know what to say. "That's the kind of courage that changes things," Mercer continued. "You reminded him what it means to fight, and now he's reminded the rest of us." He tipped his hat. "Whatever happens next, ma'am, you should know you started this. You lit the spark." The men rode out at noon, heading for Denver with the evidence Maggie had compiled. Eli stayed behind. "Aren't you going with them?" "I'm not leaving you alone again." He touched her face. "Webb's getting desperate. He'll make a move soon." "How do you know?" "Because that's what cornered animals do." That evening, Reverend Oakes arrived unexpectedly. He rode up just as the sun was setting, his horse lathered with sweat, his face tight with urgency. "Mr. Hartwell, Mrs. Holloway, we need to talk." They brought him inside and sat him by the fire. Josefa pressed a cup of coffee into his hands. "What's happened?" Eli asked. "Webb knows." Oakes took a long drink. "About the ranchers, about the evidence you've been gathering. Someone in town talked." Maggie's blood went cold. "How much does he know?" "Enough." Oakes set down the cup. "He's called an emergency meeting of the town council for tomorrow. Says he has evidence that you've been conspiring against the lawful authorities, that you've been harboring a woman of ill repute." "That's a lie," Eli said, his voice dangerous. "I know, but Webb's got half the council in his pocket. If they vote to support him, he can have you arrested, seized your property, put Mrs. Holloway and her children on the street." Maggie gripped Eli's arm. "Can he do that?" "He's a judge," Oakes said grimly. "He can do almost anything he wants, unless someone stops him." Eli was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was calm. "Then someone will have to stop him." "How?" "By showing up at that meeting tomorrow and telling the truth." Eli looked at Maggie. "All of it, in front of everyone." "It's risky," Oakes warned. Webb will have his supporters there. It could get ugly. Let it get ugly. Eli stood. I'm tired of hiding, tired of playing defense. Tomorrow we take the fight to him. Maggie stood beside him. We, not you, we. Eli looked at her. Maggie, I started this. I found the evidence. I'm not going to hide while you face him alone. It could be dangerous. I walked 3 miles through a blizzard to save my children. I think I can handle one crooked judge. Despite everything, Eli smiled. All right, he said. We do it together. That night, neither of them slept. They sat in the parlor going over the evidence one more time, rehearsing what they would say. Josefa brought them coffee and sandwiches, then took the children upstairs and stayed with them. What if it doesn't work? Maggie asked, somewhere around midnight. Then we'll figure out something else. What if they arrest you? Then you take the children and go to Denver. Find Jacob Mercer. He'll help you get to the territorial marshal. Maggie shook her head. I'm not leaving you. Maggie. I said I'm not leaving you. She grabbed his hands. We're in this together. Whatever happens, we face it together. Eli pulled her close. They held each other in the firelight, drawing strength from each other's presence. I love you, he whispered. I know. She pressed her face against his chest. I love you too. Morning came too quickly. Maggie dressed in the best clothes she had, the ones Josefa had altered to fit. She pulled her hair back in a simple knot and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman who stared back at her was different from the one who'd stumbled up to Eli's gate a few weeks ago. That woman had been broken, desperate, empty. This woman had fire in her eyes. Eli was waiting by the wagon. He wore his dark suit again, the one he'd worn to church. His face was set, determined, ready for battle. Children are staying with Josefa, he said. She'll keep them safe. Maggie nodded. She'd said goodbye to Thomas and Lily that morning, holding them tight, promising to come back. Lily had looked at her with those 2 wise eyes. Be careful, Mama. I will, baby. And tell Mr. Eli to be careful too. Maggie had kissed her daughter's forehead. I'll tell him. The ride into town was quiet. Maggie clutched the folder of evidence in her lap, going over the facts one more time in her head. Names, dates, amounts. The pattern of corruption that Webb had woven over years. Whatever happens in there, Eli said as they approached the town. Stay close to me. If things go bad, get to the door. I'll cover you. Nothing's going to go bad. Probably not. He glanced at her. But just in case. The town hall was packed. Every seat was filled. People stood along the walls, crowded in doorways, pressed against windows to catch a glimpse of what was happening inside. Judge Webb sat at the front, flanked by 2 council members. His face was serene, confident. The face of a man who believed he'd already won. Eli and Maggie walked in together. The crowd parted before them. Whispers followed in their wake. There she is, the widow. Shameless living with him like that. I heard she's after his money. Maggie kept her chin up, her spine straight. She would not let them see her fear. Webb smiled as they approached. Mr. Hartwell, so good of you to join us. And you've brought your companion. Her name is Mrs. Holloway. Eli said, his voice carrying across the hall. And she's here to speak for herself. Webb's smile flickered. I don't recall inviting her to address the council. I don't recall asking your permission. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Webb's expression hardened. Very well. But I must warn you, this council has serious concerns about your recent activities, concerns that could result in legal consequences. Then let's address those concerns. Eli stepped forward. Right here, right now, in front of everyone. Webb hesitated. He clearly hadn't expected a direct confrontation. Mr. Hartwell, perhaps a private meeting would be more appropriate. No. Eli's voice was iron. Whatever accusations you want to make, you can make them in public, and I'll answer them the same way. The crowd shifted. Maggie could feel the mood-changing curiosity replacing hostility. Webb had no choice. "Very well," he said, his smooth mask slipping back into place. "It has come to my attention that you have been conspiring with known criminals to undermine the lawful authorities of this territory. Which criminals would those be?" "The ranchers you've been meeting with. Men who owe significant debts to the bank. Men who would say anything to avoid paying what they owe." "Men you've cheated," Maggie said. Every eye in the room turned to her. Webb's face went red. "Excuse me." Maggie stepped forward, holding up the folder of evidence. "I've spent the last 2 weeks going through the financial records of a dozen ranchers in this territory. And I've found a pattern, Judge Webb. A very clear pattern." She pulled out the first document. Jacob Mercer lost his ranch 5 years ago when a loan was called in early. A loan that appears to have his signature on it. She held up the paper. "Except Mr. Mercer never signed that loan. His handwriting samples don't match. The signature was forged." Webb's face paled. "That's absurd. Those documents were verified by you." Maggie pulled out another paper. "Tom Bridges lost his water rights 3 years ago based on a survey that showed his boundary lines in the wrong place. That survey was conducted by a company you own a controlling interest in." The crowd was utterly silent now. "William Dawson's mortgage was sold to a Denver bank without his knowledge, then called in 30 days later. The bank that bought it was founded by your brother-in-law." She spread the documents across the table before her. "I have 12 more cases just like these. 12 families destroyed by legal manipulation, forged documents, and insider trading, and every single one of them leads back to you." Webb stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is outrageous. This woman is a vagrant, a charity case. She has no standing to make these accusations." "She's not the one making them," a voice said from the back of the room. Everyone turned. Jacob Mercer stood in the doorway flanked by Tom Bridges and half a dozen other ranchers. "We are," Mercer said. "And we've already given our testimony to the territorial marshal in Denver." The blood drained from Webb's face. "That's impossible. The marshal wouldn't—" "He would when we showed him the evidence." Mercer walked forward, his weathered face hard as stone. "We rode through the night to get there, handed over everything Mrs. Holloway compiled. By now there's a warrant being drawn up with your name on it." Pandemonium. The crowd erupted in shouts and confusion. Council members looked at each other in panic. Webb backed toward the door, his smooth confidence shattered. "This is a conspiracy," he shouted. "A pack of lies from bitter failures who couldn't pay their debts." "It's the truth," Eli said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "And everyone in this room knows it." He stepped toward Webb and the judge flinched. "You've been stealing from this community for years, hiding behind your position, using the law as a weapon against the people it was supposed to protect. That ends today." Webb's eyes darted around the room looking for allies, finding none. Even the council members who'd supported him were edging away. "You can't prove anything," Webb said, but his voice was weak now, desperate. "We already have." Maggie held up the final document. "This is a record of every transaction you've made through your shell companies for the past 10 years. Bank records, property transfers, payments to officials who looked the other way." She met his eyes. "It's over, Judge Webb. It's been over since the moment you decided to threaten the people I love." Webb lunged. It happened so fast, Maggie barely had time to react. He grabbed for the documents, his face twisted with rage, his hands clawing toward her throat. Eli moved faster. He caught Webb's arm and twisted, spinning the judge away from Maggie. Webb stumbled, hit the floor hard. Before he could rise, Eli was standing over him, fists clenched. "Give me a reason," Eli said quietly. "Please, give me a reason." Webb looked up at him, and for the first time there was fear in his eyes. "This isn't over," he hissed. "I'll destroy you. I'll destroy all of you." "No." Maggie stepped forward, looking down at the broken man on the floor. "You won't." The doors burst open. A man in a marshal's uniform strode in, followed by 2 deputies. He surveyed the scene. Webb on the floor, Eli standing over him, the crowd pressed against the walls and nodded once. Cornelius Webb. Webb scrambled to his feet. Marshal, I can explain. You're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to deprive citizens of their property. Anything you say will be used against you in a court of law. The deputies moved forward. Webb tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. They caught him, cuffed him, dragged him toward the door. This isn't justice, Webb screamed. This is a lynching. I'm a judge. I have rights. You have the right to remain silent, the marshal said dryly. I'd recommend using it. And then Webb was gone, dragged out into the cold morning light, his empire crumbling around him. The crowd stood in stunned silence. Then slowly someone started to clap. It was Reverend Oakes, standing in the corner, his face bright with something like joy. Then Jacob Mercer joined in. Then Tom Bridges. Then more and more, until the hall was filled with applause and cheering. Maggie stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Eli took her hand. You did it, he said. We did it. He pulled her close right there in front of everyone and kissed her. The cheering grew louder. When they finally broke apart, Maggie was crying. Happy tears this time. The kind that healed instead of hurt. What happens now? She asked. Eli smiled, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked truly at peace. Now, he said, we go home. The ride home felt different. Maggie sat close to Eli on the wagon seat, her shoulder pressed against his, the evidence folder still clutched in her hands. The weight of it seemed lighter now. The weapon had served its purpose. You're quiet, Eli said. I'm trying to understand what just happened. We won. Did we? Maggie looked at him. Webb's arrested, but he's got money connections. What if he gets out? What if he comes back? Eli was silent for a moment. Then he reached over and took her hand. Then we'll face him again. Together. Same as before. You make it sound simple. It is simple. He squeezed her fingers. I spent 6 years running from pain, Maggie, hiding from it, trying to bury it under work and silence. You taught me there's another way. What way is that? Standing and fighting, no matter how scared you are. He glanced at her. You walked into that town hall today and took on the most powerful man in the territory. You didn't flinch. You didn't back down. I was terrified. I know. That's what made it brave. They rode in silence for a while, the horses' hooves steady on the frozen ground. Maggie watched the landscape pass the snow-covered fields, the distant mountains, the endless sky. Eli. Yeah. What happens now with us, I mean? He pulled the horses to a stop, turned to face her fully. What do you want to happen? Maggie had asked herself that question 100 times over the past few weeks. At first, the answer had been simple survival, safety for her children, a roof over their heads, and food in their bellies. But somewhere along the way, the answer had changed. I want to stay, she said, not as your housekeeper, not as a business arrangement. She met his eyes. I want to stay as your wife. The words hung in the cold air between them. Eli's expression didn't change. For a long, terrible moment, Maggie thought she'd said too much, pushed too far. Then he smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, was a ring. Gold, simple, beautiful. It was my mother's, he said. She gave it to me before she passed, told me to save it for someone worthy. Maggie's vision blurred with tears. I know it's not much, Eli continued. I know you deserve diamonds and fancy things. But this ring has been in my family for 3 generations, and I can't think of anyone I'd rather give it to. He took her hand. Margaret Holloway, will you marry me? She couldn't speak, could barely breathe. So she did the only thing she could. She kissed him. When they finally broke apart, both of them were crying. Is that a yes? Eli asked, his voice rough. That's a yes, Maggie whispered. That's 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. They sat there for a long time holding hands, watching the sun climb higher in the winter sky. Two broken people who had somehow found each other. Two souls who had learned to hope again. "We should get home," Eli said finally. "The children will be worried." Maggie smiled. "The children. Our children. Our children." Eli's voice caught on the words. "I like the sound of that." Thomas saw them coming before anyone else. He was perched on the porch railing, watching the road with anxious eyes when the wagon appeared over the rise. He let out a whoop that could probably be heard in Denver and ran toward them, nearly falling twice in his excitement. "Mama, Mr. Eli. You're back. Did you catch the bad man? Is he in jail? Are we safe now?" Eli swung down from the wagon and caught Thomas before he could crash into the horses. He lifted the boy onto his shoulders, grinning up at him. "We caught him. He's in jail. And yes, we're safe." Thomas's face lit up. "Really forever safe. Forever safe." Lily appeared on the porch more cautious than her brother, her sketchbook clutched against her chest. She watched them approach with those two wise eyes. "Mama, is it true?" Maggie climbed down from the wagon and walked to her daughter. She knelt in the snow, taking Lily's small hands in her own. "It's true, baby. The bad man can't hurt us anymore." Lily nodded slowly. Then her gaze dropped to Maggie's hand. "Mama, you're wearing a ring." Maggie had forgotten. She looked down at the gold band on her finger, then back up at her daughter. "I am." "Is it from Mr. Eli?" "Yes." "Does that mean—" Lily's voice trailed off. Her eyes moved to Eli, who was still carrying Thomas on his shoulders. "Does that mean he's going to be our pa now?" Maggie's heart clenched. "Only if you want him to be." Lily was quiet for a long moment. Maggie held her breath, suddenly terrified of the answer. Then Lily walked past her toward Eli. She stopped in front of him and looked up, her small face solemn. "If you marry my mama," she said, "you have to promise to never leave. My real pa left and it broke Mama's heart. I won't let that happen again." Eli set Thomas down gently. He knelt in the snow, bringing himself to Lily's eye level. "Lily, I'm going to tell you something important. Can you listen?" She nodded. "I had a daughter once. Her name was Clara. She was about your age when she died." Lily's eyes widened. "Losing her was the worst thing that ever happened to me. For a long time I thought I'd never feel like a father again. I thought that part of me was gone forever." He reached out and took Lily's hand. "Then you and your brother came into my life, and I realized I was wrong. The love doesn't go away, Lily. It just finds new people to hold on to." Lily's lip trembled. "So you won't leave?" "I will never leave you. Not as long as I live." Eli's voice was fierce with conviction. "I promise you that, Lily. On my honor. On my mother's grave. On everything I hold sacred." Lily stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his neck. Eli held her like she was made of glass and gold. His eyes closed. His shoulders shook. Thomas watched with wide eyes. "Does this mean we're a family now?" Maggie pulled him close. "Yes, baby, we're a family now." The four of them stayed there in the snow, holding each other until Josefa came out and shooed them inside, complaining about pneumonia and frozen fingers and stubborn fools who didn't know when to come in from the cold. But she was smiling through her complaints, and later, when she thought no one was watching, she crossed herself and whispered a prayer of thanks. Word spread quickly. By the next morning, everyone in Redstone Creek knew about Webb's arrest. They also knew about the role Eli and Maggie had played in bringing him down. The reactions were mixed. Some people, like Reverend Oakes and the widow Martha Perkins, came to the ranch to offer congratulations and support. Others stayed away, embarrassed by how they'd treated Maggie, unsure how to face her now. And a few loyal to Webb until the end made their displeasure known. The first sign of trouble came 3 days after the arrest. Maggie was in the study working on the quarterly accounts when Josefa burst through the door. "Señora, come quick!" She ran to the front of the house. Eli was already on the porch, rifle in hand, staring at the road. A group of riders was approaching. 6 men, maybe more. They moved slowly, deliberately, spreading out as they neared the gate. "Who are they?" Maggie asked. "Webb's men." Eli's voice was flat. "The ones who cut my fence. The ones who stole my cattle. What do they want? Revenge, most likely." He turned to her. "Get the children upstairs. Stay with them. Don't come out until I say so." Eli. "Please, Maggie, I need to know you're safe." She wanted to argue, wanted to stand beside him the way she had in the town hall. But she saw the fear in his eyes and she understood. This wasn't about pride. It was about protecting his family. "Be careful," she said. "Always am." She gathered Thomas and Lily and took them upstairs. They huddled in the east wing, away from the windows, while Josepha guarded the door with an old shotgun she'd pulled from somewhere in the kitchen. "What's happening, Mama?" Thomas whispered. "Some bad men are outside, but Mr. Eli's going to take care of it." "What if they hurt him?" "They won't." "But what if they do?" Maggie pulled him close, pressing her lips to his hair. "Then we'll take care of each other, the way we always have." From outside she heard voices, angry voices. Then Eli's voice, calm and steady, cutting through the noise. "You're on my property. I'm asking you to leave." "We ain't going nowhere, Hartwell." The lead rider's voice was thick with malice. "You got the judge arrested. You destroyed a good man. Now you're gonna pay for it." "Webb destroyed himself. I just helped people see the truth." "The truth." Laughter, cruel and mocking. "The truth is, you're a washed-up rancher who let a pretty widow lead him around by the nose. She played you Hartwell. Same way she'll play whoever comes next." Maggie's hands curled into fists. "You've got until the count of 10 to get off my land," Eli said. "After that, I start shooting. There's 6 of us and 1 of you. Then you'd better hope I miss." Silence. Long and heavy. Then the sound of horses shifting, muttered curses, hooves retreating. Maggie released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. A few minutes later, Eli appeared in the doorway. His face was pale, but his hands were steady. "They're gone." Maggie ran to him. He caught her, held her tight. "I thought—" Her voice broke. "I thought they were going to—" "They were cowards," Eli said. "Webb's men always were. They're only brave when they've got the law on their side." "What if they come back?" "They won't. Webb's finished. His money's frozen. His allies are scrambling to distance themselves." He pulled back, looking at her face. "It's over, Maggie. Really over this time." She wanted to believe him. Wanted it so badly she could taste it. But she'd learned the hard way that happiness was fragile, that peace could shatter in an instant. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I know." He kissed her forehead. "I am too. But we're going to get through this. All of us. Together." The days that followed were quiet. Webb's trial was scheduled for the spring when the territorial court convened in Denver. Until then, he would remain in custody, his assets frozen, his empire crumbling. The ranchers he'd cheated were slowly rebuilding. Some of them stopped by the Hartwell Ranch to pay their respects to thank Maggie for the work she'd done uncovering the fraud. Jacob Mercer brought a side of beef. Tom Bridges brought his wife and children to meet Lily and Thomas. The community was healing. Slowly, awkwardly, but healing nonetheless. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after Webb's arrest, Martha Perkins arrived at the ranch. She was a small woman with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes, and she carried herself with the dignity of someone who had survived more than her share of hardship. "Mrs. Holloway," she said, standing on the porch. "May I speak with you?" Maggie led her to the parlor. Josepha brought tea. They sat across from each other, 2 widows studying each other with cautious respect. "I owe you an apology," Martha said finally. "When you first came to town, I didn't speak up for you. I let the others say terrible things, and I stayed silent. You told Eli I was worth helping. He said you sent me to his gate." Martha nodded. "I did, but that's not enough. I should have done more. Should have stood beside you in that church. Should have told Mrs. Calhoun to mind her own business. Why didn't you—" Martha was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was thick with old pain. "Because I was afraid. When my husband died, this community turned on me too. Said I must have done something wrong. Said a good wife would have kept her man alive." Maggie's heart clenched. "That's terrible." "It was. And it taught me to keep my head down. To not make waves." Martha met her eyes. "But watching you stand up to Webb, watching you fight for your family, it reminded me of who I used to be. Before I let them beat the courage out of me." She reached across and took Maggie's hand. "I'm sorry I wasn't braver, and I'm grateful you were." Maggie squeezed her fingers. "It's never too late to start over, Mrs. Perkins. Trust me, I know." Martha smiled, and for a moment she looked years younger. "Call me Martha," she said. "I think we're going to be friends." The wedding plans began almost by accident. Josefa mentioned something about spring flowers one evening, and suddenly Thomas was asking when the wedding would be, and Lily was sketching designs for a dress, and Eli was looking at Maggie with a helpless expression that made her laugh out loud. "I suppose we should set a date," she said. "Spring," Eli said immediately. "When the snow melts, when everything's green again." "That's months away." "I know." He took her hand. "But I want to do this right. Want everyone to see that we're not hiding, that we're not ashamed." Maggie understood. The town had judged them harshly. A proper wedding, a public celebration, would be a statement, a declaration that they had nothing to be ashamed of. "All right," she said. "Spring it is." The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Maggie's life. She fell into a rhythm at the ranch. Mornings were for accounts and correspondence. Afternoons were for teaching. She'd expanded her classes to include children from neighboring ranches, their parents grateful for the opportunity. Evenings were for family gathered around the fire, Eli telling stories, while Thomas pestered him with questions, and Lily sketched quietly in her book. The nightmares still came sometimes. Lily would wake screaming about cave-ins and crushing darkness. Thomas would cry for his father in his sleep. Maggie herself would jolt awake, heart-pounding, certain she was back in that freezing boarding house with her children starving beside her. But now, when the darkness came, she wasn't alone. Eli would appear in the doorway, patient and steady. He'd sit with the children until they fell back asleep. He'd hold Maggie's hand in the quiet hours before dawn, talking about nothing and everything, until the fear loosened its grip on her heart. "You're good at this," she told him one night, watching him carry a sleeping Thomas back to bed. "Good at what? Being a father." Eli paused in the doorway. His face was shadowed, but she could see the emotion in his eyes. "I had practice," he said quietly. "With Clara." "Tell me about her." He was silent for a long moment. Then he sat down on the edge of the bed, and for the first time he really talked about his daughter. She was curious, always asking questions. Why is the sky blue? Where do the stars go during the day? How do horses know where to walk? He smiled, but it was bittersweet. She drove Sarah crazy sometimes, but I loved it. Loved watching her figure out the world. What else? She sang all the time. Made up songs about the chickens, the cows, the fence posts. Everything had a song. His voice caught. The house was so quiet after she was gone. That was the worst part. The silence. Maggie reached out and took his hand. "The house isn't quiet anymore." "No." He looked at her, and something shifted in his face. "It isn't." He leaned over and kissed her softly. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For giving me my life back." As winter slowly loosened its grip, the ranch began to transform. Eli threw himself into preparations for the spring. He repaired fences, cleared brush, worked alongside his ranch hands from dawn to dusk. Maggie watched him sometimes from the window, marveling at the change in him. This wasn't the haunted man who had found her at his gate. This was someone who had remembered how to live. One morning she found him behind the barn working on something she couldn't quite see. "What are you doing?" He looked up startled, then stepped aside to reveal his project. It was a swing. Simple, sturdy, hung from the branch of the old cottonwood tree. For the children, he said almost shyly. Clara had one when she was small. I thought... He didn't finish. Maggie threw her arms around him. It's perfect, she said into his chest. It's absolutely perfect. Thomas discovered the swing that afternoon and promptly claimed it as his own. Lily was more cautious, watching her brother soar through the air with wide eyes. You try Lily, Thomas called. It's fun. Lily shook her head. Eli walked over and knelt beside her. You don't have to if you don't want to, but I'll hold on the whole time if you're worried about falling. Lily looked at him for a long moment, then slowly she nodded. Eli lifted her onto the swing, keeping his hands steady on the ropes. He pushed gently, just enough to make her sway. See, he said, nothing to be scared of. Lily's grip loosened slightly. A small smile crept across her face. Higher, she said. Eli pushed a little harder. Lily laughed a real laugh, bright and free, the first Maggie had heard from her in months. Maggie watched them, her heart so full it ached. This was what she'd walked through the blizzard for. Not just survival, not just safety. This, family, love, home. That night after the children were asleep, Maggie sat with Eli on the porch. The sky was clear stars, scattered like diamonds across black velvet. The air was cold, but not bitter, hinting at the warmth to come. I've been thinking, Eli said. About what? About the future. He paused. About children. Maggie's heart skipped. What about them? Thomas and Lily, they're mine now. In my heart, they've been mine since the first day. He turned to look at her. But I was thinking, maybe someday, there could be more. Maggie had thought about it too. Late at night in the quiet moments before sleep. She'd imagined a baby with Eli's blue eyes. A child who would never know hunger or fear or abandonment. I'd like that, she said softly. Someday. Not right away. We've got enough on our hands. He smiled. But eventually. Eventually, she agreed. He took her hand. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, dreaming about a future neither of them had dared to imagine. And somewhere in the house, in the room that had once belonged to Clara Lily Holloway, slept peacefully for the first time in 8 months. She dreamed of her father, but the dream wasn't sad. He was smiling, waving goodbye, telling her it was okay to let go. Telling her she was safe now. When she woke, the sun was streaming through the window, and she could smell breakfast cooking, and she could hear Thomas laughing at something Mr. Eli had said. She pulled her sketchbook from under her pillow and turned to a fresh page. For the first time since her father died, she didn't draw the mine. Didn't draw the darkness and the falling rocks. She drew a house, a ranch, 4 figures standing in front of it holding hands. At the bottom of the page in careful letters, she wrote, "My family." Then she went downstairs to join them. Spring arrived like a promise kept. The snow retreated slowly, revealing patches of brown earth that quickly turned green. Wildflowers pushed through the thawed ground, tiny bursts of color that spread across the fields like scattered jewels. The air softened, carrying the scent of new growth and wet soil. And Maggie Holloway prepared to become Maggie Hartwell. The wedding was set for the last Sunday of April. Reverend Oakes had offered to perform the ceremony in the church, but Eli had a different idea. "I want to get married here," he said, standing with Maggie on the porch one evening. On the ranch, under the cottonwood tree. Why there? Because that's where Clara used to play. His voice was soft. And that's where Lily laughs now. It feels right. Like the past and the future meeting in one place. Maggie understood. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a healing. Under the cottonwood tree it is. The preparations consumed the following weeks. Josepha took charge of the food, recruiting Martha Perkins and 3 other women from town to help. The ranch hands built a wooden arch and draped it with early spring flowers. Thomas appointed himself the official ring bearer and practiced walking down an imaginary aisle until he had it perfect. And Lily, quiet Lily, who never asked for anything, made a single request. "Mama, Can I draw something for the wedding? Of course, baby. What did you have in mind? Lily showed her the sketch she'd been working on. It was the family portrait she'd drawn the morning after the swing, but larger, more detailed. 4 figures holding hands in front of the ranch house, the cottonwood tree spreading its branches above them. I want to give it to Mr. Eli, Lily said, as a wedding present. Is that okay? Maggie had to turn away so her daughter wouldn't see her cry. That's more than okay, sweetheart. That's perfect. 2 weeks before the wedding, Jacob Mercer rode out to the ranch with news from Denver. Cornelius Webb had been convicted. The trial had lasted only 3 days. The evidence Maggie had compiled, combined with the testimony of a dozen ranchers, had been overwhelming. Webb's own lawyers had advised him to plead guilty, but his pride wouldn't allow it. In the end, it hadn't mattered. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. 20 years in the territorial prison, Mercer said, sitting in the Hartwell kitchen with a cup of coffee. Maybe more. The judge said he'd never seen such a systematic pattern of fraud. Eli nodded slowly. And his assets? Being divided among the people he cheated. It'll take years to sort out, but the process has started. Mercer looked at Maggie. You should know, Mrs. Holloway, the territorial marshal, mentioned you specifically, said your record-keeping was the key to the whole case. I just organized what was already there. Don't sell yourself short. Mercer set down his cup. You did something a lot of powerful men couldn't do. You brought down Cornelius Webb. After he left, Eli found Maggie standing at the window, staring out at nothing. You all right? I keep thinking about Daniel. She didn't turn around. About what he'd say if he could see all this. Eli moved to stand beside her. What do you think he'd say? Maggie was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled. He'd say, I did good. He'd say he was proud of me. She looked at Eli. And he'd say thank you. For taking care of his children. For loving them like your own. Eli took her hand. I do love them. Like my own. Like they've always been mine. I know. She leaned against him. That's why I can let go. Because I know they're safe. Because I know we all are. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and warm. Maggie woke early, unable to sleep. Her stomach churning with nerves she couldn't explain. She'd faced down a corrupt judge. She'd survived a blizzard. She'd walked 3 miles through the snow with 2 starving children. Why was she so terrified of saying 2 simple words? Josefa found her pacing in the kitchen, still in her nightgown. Señora, you should be getting ready. I know, Maggie pressed her hands to her stomach. What if I'm making a mistake? Josefa raised an eyebrow. Do you love him? Yes. Does he love you? Yes. Do your children love him? Yes. Then what mistake? Josefa took her by the shoulders and steered her toward the stairs. Go. Get dressed. Become a bride. Stop thinking so much. Maggie laughed despite herself. You're very bossy. Someone has to be. But Josefa was smiling. Now go. Rosa and Martha are waiting to help you with your dress. The dress was simple but beautiful. White cotton fitted at the waist, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Josefa had made it herself, working late into the night for weeks. Martha had contributed the lace saved from her own wedding dress 30 years before. You look beautiful, Mama, Lily said, watching from the doorway, as Martha finished buttoning the back. Do you think so? Lily nodded solemnly. Mr. Eli's going to cry when he sees you. He will not. He will. I've seen him cry before when he thinks nobody's looking. Lily walked over and took her mother's hand. He cries about Clara, and sometimes about us. Happy tears, though, not sad ones. Maggie knelt down to hug her daughter. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just didn't notice. Maggie laughed and kissed her forehead. Fair enough. Thomas burst through the door, nearly knocking Martha over. Mama, everyone's here. There's like 100 people outside. 100? Well, maybe not 100, but a lot. He bounced on his heels. Can we start now? I've been practicing walking really slowly and I don't want to forget how. Almost, baby. Give me 5 more minutes. Thomas groaned, but retreated, pulling Lily with him. Martha finished the last button and stepped back. There. Perfect. Maggie looked at herself in the mirror. The woman who stared back was almost unrecognizable, not because of the dress or the carefully arranged hair, because of the light in her eyes. Hope, joy, peace, things she'd thought she'd lost forever. Ready? Martha asked. Maggie took a deep breath. Ready. The cottonwood tree spread its new green leaves over the gathering like a blessing. Chairs had been arranged in rows on the grass, facing the wooden arch draped with wildflowers. Nearly 50 people had come, more than Maggie had expected. She recognized the ranchers who'd testified against Webb, the ranch hands who'd become like family. Reverend Oakes standing under the arch in his Sunday best. And at the front, waiting for her, stood Eli. He wore his dark suit, the one he'd worn to church on that first terrible Sunday. But he looked different now. Younger somehow. Lighter. Like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. When he saw Maggie emerge from the house, his face transformed. Lily was right. He cried. Maggie walked toward him. Thomas on one side carrying the rings on a small velvet pillow, Lily on the other, holding a bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked that morning. The guests rose as she passed, but she barely saw them. Her eyes were locked on Eli's. She reached him. He took her hands. "You're beautiful," he whispered. "You're crying." "I know." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, laughing at himself. "I can't seem to stop." Reverend Oakes cleared his throat gently. "Shall we begin?" The ceremony was simple as they'd planned. Oakes spoke about love and commitment, about the courage it took to begin again after loss. He spoke about family, not just the family you're born into, but the family you choose. Then he turned to Eli. "Do you, Elijah Hartwell, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do you part?" Eli's voice was steady. "I do." "And do you, Margaret Holloway, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do you part?" Maggie looked at Eli, at the man who had opened his home to strangers, who had stood by her against impossible odds, who had learned to love again after losing everything. "I do." Thomas stepped forward with the rings nearly tripping over his own feet in his excitement. Eli caught him, steadied him, and took the rings with a wink that made Thomas beam. They exchanged the rings. Eli's hands were shaking. So were Maggie's. "By the power vested in me, by the territory of Colorado," Reverend Oakes said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." He smiled. "You may kiss the bride." Eli cupped her face in his hands and kissed her softly. The guests erupted in applause. When they finally broke apart, Thomas tugged at Eli's coat. "Does this mean I can call you Pa now? For real?" Eli laughed and swept the boy up in his arms. "For real, son. Forever and always." Thomas whooped and threw his arms around Eli's neck. Lily hung back, watching with those quiet eyes. Maggie reached for her, but Eli got there first. Still holding Thomas with one arm, he knelt down and extended his other hand to Lily. "You too, sweetheart. You're my daughter now, if you'll have me." Lily studied him for a long moment. Then slowly she stepped forward and took his hand. "I made you something," she said, "for a wedding present." She pulled the rolled-up drawing from where she'd hidden it in her sleeve. She handed it to Eli, her face solemn. Eli unrolled it carefully. When he saw what it was, his composure finally broke. The drawing was beautiful. The ranch house, the cottonwood tree, the 4 of them standing together. At the bottom, in Lily's careful handwriting, "My family." Eli pulled Lily into his arms, holding both children, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you," he whispered. "This is the best present anyone's ever given me." Maggie wrapped her arms around all three of them, and they stood there under the cottonwood tree, a family complete at last. The celebration lasted well into the evening. Josefa had outdone herself with the food. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, fresh-bred vegetables from the early garden pies, and cakes that disappeared almost as fast as they were set out. Someone produced a fiddle, and dancing broke out on the grass. Maggie danced with Eli first, then with Jacob Mercer, then with Thomas, who stepped on her feet more than the floor, but made up for it with enthusiasm. She danced until her legs ached and her face hurt from smiling. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, she slipped away from the crowd for a moment of quiet. She found herself standing at the edge of the property, looking out at the land that was now her home. The fields stretched away toward the mountains, green and growing. The air smelled of spring flowers and wood smoke and possibility. "There you are." Eli appeared beside her, 2 glasses of wine in his hands. He offered her one. "I was looking for you," he said. "Just needed a moment." She took a sip. "It's a lot to take in." "Having regrets?" "Not even one." She leaned against him. "I was just thinking about how different my life is now. How different I am." "How so?" 3 months ago I was starving, homeless, ready to give up my children just to keep them alive." She shook her head. "Now I'm married to the best man I've ever known. My children are safe and happy. I have a home, a community, a future." "You earned it. Every bit of it. We earned it. Together." She turned to face him. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Eli. You know that, right?" He set down his glass and took her hands. "Maggie, the day you showed up at my gate was the day my life started again. I'd been dead inside for 6 years, just going through the motions, waiting for the end." His voice was rough with emotion. "You woke me up, you and those children. You reminded me what it felt like to love someone, to care about something, to want to see the sunrise." "Eli, let me finish." He squeezed her hands. "I know we've both lost people we loved. I know a part of us will always belong to them, but I also know that love isn't finite. It doesn't run out. The love I had for Sarah and Clara doesn't diminish what I feel for you. If anything, it makes it stronger. Because I know how precious it is, how quickly it can be taken away." He lifted her hand and kissed her palm. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret walking up to my gate. I will love you and protect you and stand by you no matter what comes. That's my promise, Maggie. As your husband, as the father of your children, as the man who gets to wake up beside you every morning for the rest of his days." Maggie's vision blurred with tears. "That was beautiful." "I've been practicing." She laughed and threw her arms around him. He held her close, his chin resting on top of her head. "We should get back to the party," he said eventually. "People will talk." "Let them talk." She pulled back and smiled up at him. "I don't care anymore. Let them say whatever they want. I know the truth. And so do you." "And what's the truth?" "That we found each other, against all odds, despite everything. And that nothing, not gossip, not hardship, not even time itself, can take that away." Eli kissed her forehead. "I love you, Mrs. Hartwell." "I love you too, Mr. Hartwell." They walked back to the party hand in hand, ready to rejoin the celebration, ready to begin the rest of their lives. The months that followed were the happiest any of them had ever known. Eli taught Thomas to ride properly, and the boy took to it like he'd been born in the saddle. By summer, he was racing across the fields, whooping with joy, his fears forgotten. Lily continued to draw, filling notebook after notebook with sketches of ranch life. Her nightmares came less frequently now, and when they did, she had a father to comfort her. Maggie continued her teaching, expanding her classes to include more children from the surrounding ranches. Word had spread about the widow who'd brought down Cornelius Webb, and families who once would have shunned her now sought her out. Her reputation had transformed from scandal to legend. The ranch prospered. With Webb's schemes exposed, fair dealing returned to the territory. Eli recovered his stolen cattle, reclaimed his north section, and expanded his operations. He hired more hands, built new outbuildings, and started planning for a future that once seemed impossible. And in the fall, Maggie discovered she was pregnant. She told Eli on a quiet evening in October, sitting together on the porch swing he'd built as a wedding present. "Are you sure?" His voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sure." Josefa confirmed it this morning. Eli's face went through a dozen emotions in rapid succession: shock, disbelief, fear, and finally overwhelming joy. "A baby," he breathed. "We're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy." He pulled her close, laughing and crying at the same time. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it." They told the children the next morning. Thomas was ecstatic, immediately announcing his intentions to teach the baby how to ride before it could walk. Lily was quieter, more thoughtful. "Will you still love us the same?" she asked, her voice small. "After the baby comes." Maggie knelt down and took her daughter's hands. "Lily, listen to me carefully. Love doesn't divide. It multiplies. Having another child won't mean I love you and Thomas any less. It means there will be more love in this house than ever before." Lily considered this for a moment. Then she nodded. "Okay," she said. "I think I'd like to have a baby sister." "What if it's a brother?" Lily shrugged. "I guess that would be okay too. I already know how to handle Thomas." The baby was born in late April, almost exactly a year after the wedding. A girl. They named her Clara. Eli wept when he held her for the first time. Great heaving sobs that shook his whole body. Maggie watched him cradle their daughter, watched him whisper to her about her namesake, and knew that some wounds never fully heal. But they can become something beautiful. Something that honors what was lost while embracing what has been found. Young Clara had her father's blue eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. She was colicky and demanding and absolutely perfect. Thomas doted on her. Lily appointed herself the official baby guardian, watching over her little sister with fierce protectiveness. And Eli, transformed from a haunted widower into a father of three, his days filled with the chaos and noise and overwhelming love of a growing family. 5 years later, on a warm summer evening, Maggie stood on the porch of the ranch house and watched her family. Thomas, now 10, was helping Eli mend a fence in the near pasture. He'd grown tall and strong, his father's confidence evident in every movement. Lily, 13, sat under the cottonwood tree, with young Clara teaching her to draw. The little girl's tongue poked out in concentration as she tried to copy her sister's careful lines. Josefa emerged from the house with a pitcher of lemonade. She was grayer now, slower, but her eyes still held the same quiet wisdom. "A good life, Señora," she said, following Maggie's gaze. "A blessed life." "Yes," Maggie agreed. "It is." She thought about the woman she'd been that desperate morning at the gate. Starving, terrified, ready to give away her children to save them. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. The pain and the struggle. The moments when she'd wanted to give up. The unexpected grace that had appeared when she'd needed it most. And she thought about Eli. The man who had seen past her desperation to something worth saving. The man who had opened his heart when he had every reason to keep it closed. The man who had taught her that love wasn't weakness, it was the greatest strength of all. "Mama!" Clara's voice rang out across the yard. "Come see what I drew, baby, what you drew." "That's what I said." Maggie laughed and walked toward her children, her heart full of a joy she'd once thought impossible. Some families are bound by blood. Others are forged by choice, by hands reaching across the gap between loneliness and love, by hearts brave enough to begin again. The Hartwell family was built on all of these. On loss and redemption, on courage and faith, on the simple radical act of opening a gate to strangers and saying, "I'll take you too." As the sun set over the Colorado mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Maggie gathered her family close. Eli's arm wrapped around her waist. Thomas and Lily flanked them on either side. Clara sat on her father's shoulders, laughing at nothing, delighted by everything. They stood together in the fading light, silhouettes against the endless sky, and they were exactly where they belonged. Home. Together. Forever. The gate that had once marked the boundary between desperation and salvation now stood open, welcoming whatever the future might bring. Because they had learned the greatest lesson of all, that love freely given and bravely received was stronger than any storm, stronger than any enemy, stronger than death itself. And in the end, that was the only thing that mattered.